and welcome to this tutorial about how to make a basic trap beat. My name is Nick Ronan and I am one of the Point Blank instructors and a producer and live performer with releases on the likes of Bad Sector and Chaometry. We're going to cover a few techniques which we explore in more depth in our courses in London, Los Angeles and online. So basically I was given the latest sample pack, volume 2 from All Trap Music. This is available on Beatport, and this, if we have a look at the kind of structure of the pack which we've got over here, you can see that we've got a bunch of drum loops. We've also got some risers and some fallers, some kick drums, obviously some 808s making an appearance there, some loops, some one shots, some synth sounds, which we have also a bunch of one shots there ready to load into a sampler. And yeah, so plenty of sounds there. Now, unlike a lot of other generic sample packs that I've heard over the years, this one is actually pretty good. It is a lot of very usable sounds. They're well produced, they're not overproduced, and even though I only had a small selection of what was in the full pack, I was able to pull out some really good sounds to use in this track. And pretty much apart from the vocal, everything in this track is basically from this sample pack. So before we begin, I'm just going to quickly play through a few sections in this. Now, I'm fully aware that we are running a kind of fairly hot tempo at 160 BPM. Some people might argue that's a little bit too fast for trap, and I would probably say get over yourselves. This is just bass music in general. I'd say I've got a bit of Duke influence in here. And there's also some other sort of stuff coming into this as well. So I'm going to play you just a few of the sections just to get a bit of an idea of how it's turned out in the end.
Talking, but he about to get that ass on. Watch I get the club crunk, I'm gonna make him go.
So that's like the main theme and the first drop. Then later on I sort of try and hype it up a little bit, as I'm a bit prone to do. This is the kind of stuff I would make under my Obese pseudonym, which is kind of quite, takes some of my older kind of rave influences and kind of puts it into bass music. So yeah, I then continue with some of that more kind of Duke influence as well, some of the other parts. We go something like this. And then also, though I would normally not use full loops, I prefer to synthesize my own sounds. I prefer to, from scratch. Or at least work with one shots and stick them into a sampler. But what I've done here is to take one of the loops. I just couldn't resist it. It was so naughty. So
Talking, but he about to get that ass on. Watch I get the club crunk, I'm gonna make him go. About to get that ass on. Watch I get the club crunk, I'm gonna make him go. I hear him talking, but he about to get that ass on.
yeah, so we've got that, and then like I said, I couldn't actually resist a little bit of craziness as well, and that's just something that I'm again a bit prone to do. Yeah, so letting loose a little bit towards the end there, but however, I do pull that background. So we have the reprise of the earlier theme there, and that is kind of like ties it all back together after our little kind of venture into all kind of unknown territories in the middle. So let me just go through, basically all I'm going to do is to go through how this was created. Starting with the drums, as per usual. When I'm building a track, you might have kind of most of it just across like one row as you start to work and build up your sounds in the composition stage. But I'll always have a lot more variations, a lot more clips on the drums track. That's just because, as you can hear, kind of a little bit schizophrenic. I like to stick a lot of different stuff into one track. So what we've got is here where we, if I can just bring this up a little bit, this is our kind of very basic, kind of, it's also a bit of a half tempo, you know, kind of rolling, bouncing kick drum. So actually open just with that, just with the sub 808 kick. Now this is actually a fairly respectable, or very respectable sound on its own, which is, if we just play that again, this was the sound on its own, which is a really nice, you know, 808 quick kick. You could use this and pitch this up into a sort of melody. You probably want to tune the kick, or at least check it's in tune. But for this, I've just used it purely as a kind of percussive element. I haven't tried to make it part of the melody. I've got, you know, the other riffs there that are doing that job. But what I've done is to use this corpus effect. Now this is just a modification of one of the presets from there, but this is just taking my nice but slightly polite kick and just really cranking it up, but it's also putting a lot more harmonics in it. So the danger of obviously working with just sub bass elements is that they don't really appear very well through on other speakers. So anything that's not really capable going down to those low kind of 30 hertz to 40 hertz kind of frequencies, you're kind of losing it. So by adding a bit of harmonics, a bit of saturation, coloration onto this, it's going to kind of make that come across on other speakers. Then I'm just bringing in the halftime snare. I'll put a bit of reverb on there, and what I've actually done, this is worth noting, that I then added some return tracks in my drum rack, but by opening the I/O routing panel over here, and then what we can do is then route these returns that I've created, empty ones first, to our standard return tracks over in the project. Now this is kind of important because the whole point of returns, of course, is that you minimize the amount of effects you have to work with and control and so on. So it doesn't really make lots of sense to put new ones into the drum rack as well. After that, as I said, I've gone for this dry kick, which you heard there in the first part I played, and that's just taking the sub out, giving us a bit of respite from that heavy sub just before we lead into the drop. From there, well, as I say, kind of building up a bit of height, and, you know, bringing in those ubiquitous kind of 808 hi-hat patterns, pretty much double speed. And what I've done with those as well, if you look here, that I've used some velocity changes to give those rolls a little bit more dynamic. I could probably put a few more velocity changes across these drum patterns, to be honest, but most of this was thrown together pretty quickly. And that's kind of pretty much it. A lot of the other stuff is fairly the same. The bridge I've just swapped out for a lower and even more heavy kick drum. And then we have a few other parts where I've dropped the kick out altogether. So it's that combination of a steady snare. I've put those kind of busy secondary snares and the rolling, very top-heavy hi-hats. And this is one of the key things for me about trap that makes it so distinctive, is that really heavy low end and a really searing sharp high end. And this for me has been punctuated in my use of this kind of very top-heavy. Yeah, that kind of sound is kind of typical for this sort of style. But again, it just gives this massive impression of space, mainly because there is not a great deal cloud in the mid-range. There's not a great deal else in the really low range. And so by really cranking up the sub, making it really loud in the mix, it kind of just fills all that space. And it works really well, so having these high-end elements. So lasers, little riffs like this, the 808 hats, of course, other sounds apart from the 808 would be great to put in there as well. It doesn't have to be restricted to that. I have to admit, I've resisted doing any, kind of pitch bended sort of snare rolls in this. That's something I have avoided, to be honest. You'll just have to figure that out for yourself. Apart from that, I've kind of got this dirty horn there. Now those notes are getting longer and shorter as they go up and down in pitch. This melody kind of goes over a few octaves, and a couple of octaves, and basically that's just one of the caveats of using a traditional sampler. So I've just used the standard Ableton sampler here. I haven't really done very much with this. You could say that I could have done this in simpler, but I've actually just even the slopes here, the slope that allows me to just change curve of the envelopes there, that's actually enough to change the sound quite a great deal. So that's pretty much the only reason I'm using it for this sound. Now, if I wanted to avoid those length changes in the notes, I would have to resort to using something like Contact. There you have some more advanced sampling modes which allow you to keep the note length the same as you go up and down in pitch. Now, I have actually used Contact for this kind of take my solo off there. This kind of sound is something I wanted to drag out, so I'm using the Time Machine Pro, and I've just brought that speed right down just to elongate that sound. Again, not doing a great deal with a lot of these, and you notice I'm just doing some fairly simple reverb and a few bits of compression and saturation. Now, saturation, of course, is another thing that's quite key to the heavier end of trap as well, to give it that sizzle and that weight to the sounds. I find sounds without saturation can often be a bit too polite, really. Then, like I say, we've got this. This is actually like a loop that I've just brought the start point in a little bit to make it fit the percussion better and the rhythm. And as I say, we've also got this fairly crude vocal that comes from my own collection of a cappella samples. Now, I did take a riser from there. I did like the intensity of the riser, but it was a bit too full on when it was on its own. And rather than just duck that down in a mix, I thought I'd just use it in more creative ways. So what we've got here is it being gated by the secondary snares. So that gives us this kind of thing. If we hear that with the snares as well. Yeah, so we've got that. And then what I've also done is use it here where we don't actually hear it. We're just using it as a carrier for the vocoder on the vocal. And I've chopped the vocal up a bit as well using a kind of slice to new MIDI track function. That's a really good thing for taking any piece of audio and resequencing it. So, I mean, if I were to use a loop or a drum loop, I would typically use that to resequence that using MIDI. So here, yeah, if we go to this this scene. So that's that same riser, but now in this instance being used as a source for the vocoder. And then what else we got really? So I mean, with this, I moved quite quickly from developing the beat. I often work like that, where I'm actually building up layers and I have them in different clips. You never know when they might come in handy, but it's also just the way I like to compile and keep adding to and improving the drum programming. But I want to move from the session view pretty quickly and get into the arrangement view. It's there where, of course, if I need to reactivate it, because we can only have one view active at a time, it's there where we get to see the full length of the track. So we're running at about sort of 5 minutes and a half. It's there where I can add little flourishes of automation. So I'm using some reverb and delay sends there. It's there where I can also start to chop up clips. So towards the end I was getting a bit bored of the vocal, so I kind of like started taking pieces out and doing little time stretches and everything like that, just to kind of keep that a bit more interesting. So it's there, yeah, where automation happens. It's there where I might see some gaps, like when we need to transition from between two phrases, which might be a little bit awkward at the moment, where I could put some more, sound effects and risers and so on in there. So that's just kind of the way I work. I do build my track in a session view. I crack out my scenes as quickly as I can, really, without wasting too much time on the finer details. And then I record that in using the global, so it's not called that anymore, the record to arrangement button. And that will give me my arrangement. And that's when I then go in there and start doing edits and taking little extra bits out and cutting pieces out. I quite like the deactivation key as well, as you can see, because it means I don't have to delete it. I can just leave it there, but sort of audition it with different edits in there. Yeah, so that's kind of pretty much it so far. I've literally just got a limiter on the master. Got some fairly simple processing throughout, as I said. So in terms of improving this, I'd probably stick a few more mixing plugins on there. Probably some subtle use of saturation, some not so subtle use of saturation. And look at where we stand in terms of compression. We've got a tiny bit of side chaining on these horns from the kick drum there. Just to kind of push that away, because pretty much the only other element that's got anything to do with the kind of bass end of the frequency range. Yeah, but apart from that, sort of fairly happy with that. And as I say, that's based on the sounds. If you've got good sounds, it really is going to do a lot of the work for you when it comes to the mix down particularly. So yeah, sample packs like this with good, strong, usable sounds are definitely going to be an advantage to you. So like I say, some of the stuff we've covered here gets covered in more depth on our courses in London, Los Angeles and online. If you want to find out more, or for more tutorials as well, head on over to pointblanklondon.com. Okay, thanks for listening.